As we are nearing the end of 5th edition's life cycle, a lot of people are bringing in their opinions as to kind of the legacy that this edition is going to leave behind and giving their predictions for what the next future embodiment, envision, incarnation, whatever, of D&D is going to be. I wanted to use this video to talk about a Twitter thread that just came up from Dan Talks Games that I think actually really summarizes quite a few ideas that I know I myself have had, and I've seen many others also respond in kind that, like, yeah, this is a perfect summation of the issues that we've had with the content that has come out for D&D 5e, and why we're really hoping that Wizards of the Coast will take up the mantle of really trying to make the next version of D&D easier for DMs to run. So if you're not in the videos where people are reading through Twitter threads, hey, maybe go check out another one here. But yeah, I'm going to read through this one and give you guys kind of my perspective as somebody that has designed for this game and been running it for over 5 years. So yeah, let's go over to Twitter. Why is it doing that? Hello! So yeah, this is a little bit of a long thread, but it's very worth it if you're interested in TTRPG, industry, politics, whatever. This is very much, I think, one of the best threads on social media about kind of the legacy that D&D 5e is going to leave behind. So this is one of the main reasons I stopped GMing D&D 5e and switched to Pathfinder 2nd Edition. One of my major beefs with the culture around the game and why I'm so vocal of my criticism of it. 5e is a very difficult game to GM, and many players don't understand why. Long thread. Let's look at this right here. I think that this is a Reddit post, maybe. Another thing I dislike about how people handle problems is the default answer seeming to be, just have the DM fix it and let the players have fun. Like, I get where it's coming from. The DM is the one who runs the game, but I feel like we've crossed a line somewhere. Player disproportionately strong because they happen to pick more powerful options? Let the DM fix it. Just either give everyone except that player magic items, change how you approach encounter design for the rest of the campaign to counter specifically that player, or just make yourself happy with a player steamrolling challenges. Magic item rules lackluster? Let the DM fix it by homebrewing an entire game economy in their free time without having a reasonable guide to how powerful items are to begin with. Monster stat blocks too boring? Stop using official content and just have the DM homebrew the threats. Easy. Also, have the DM homebrew encounter guidelines worth something. And also, don't forget about that powerful player while doing that. Call me lazy, but I don't think that's right. Maybe I'm too mechanically oriented to be a part of the target audience, but I just want the game to work as I bought it and its splat books, man. Next comment and reply says, I think you've completely hit the mark here. All these little, oh, just let the DM fix it, la, eventually turns into an absurd amount of work. After having played D&D 5e for a few years, I'm definitely in the boat that I want the game to work 95% of the time instead of requiring dozens of incremental changes. This is perfect right here. This is a response that I often get in my comment sections over here on YouTube whenever I talk about a player character option just being too strong. I get some asshole in the comments that's just saying, well, be a better DM, up your game, whatever. No, stop that. Stop that. The DM already has the toughest job at the table, and you're trying to say that the DM should basically have to adjust elements of the game because of a character option you're wanting to bring to the table that, even in official books, causes issues in play. We definitely got to a point after 2019 where the player options are built on a different scale of power. Now, I don't mind that players are getting relevant features at all levels. Yeah, I think that feels really good. If they're cutting down on redundancies, yes, I think that feels really good. But whenever we get elements of the game like Twilight Domain or Peace Domain put into the game that are just objectively the best answers to basically any combat scenario, whenever we have races that are getting put into the game that are objectively the best answer for so many builds, it's absolutely absurd that there's this idea that, oh, the DM should just have to build around it. The DM should have to learn an element of game design in order to run the game. This is absurd. If anything, this is a really gatekeepery kind of a mentality to keep around the game that I'm just 100% not here for. So continuing on with Dan Talks' thread, if you want to run the game with any mechanical integrity, you spend half the time compensating for rules that just aren't there, and the other half wrestling with the rules that are because they're poorly tuned, such as CR and class balance. also tack onto this because I just wrote my alchemist class. The crafting rules are very incomprehensible. The ruling for what happens whenever you're making an attack with an alchemical item, whether or not that added in improvised weapon damage, Jeremy Crawford, the main designer, can't even agree with what the game is telling itself and how those are run. The common advice is just to fudge the numbers without players noticing, but having since played games where I don't have to fudge them to make an encounter work the way I intend, this feels like an apology for bad design. I 100% agree with this. This is another idea that I can't stand that Wizards of the Coast keeps putting out there. Like, if you find that there's an issue where something is performing in a way that you don't intend it to, just adjust it. And it's like, well, you can make a game that doesn't require the person playing the game, because the DM is playing the game too here, okay? So if the DM is having to do a whole bunch of work in the middle of, to compensate for what is bad design, if they're trying to add pieces of kit into the game, pieces of tech, whatever, they're trying to make a monster or whatever, and the rules that you're giving them are not clear, are not concise in developing a monster stat block in the ways that you all develop them, it is bad design. It is bad design. I get that to fudge or not to fudge is one of the endless GM debates, but there's a difference between fudging rules at critical moments and having to regularly adjust the stats and hit points of a creature because the math is esoteric. I'm basically redesigning encounters as I run them. There's no consistency, and that's just with the numbers. Once you get into the rulings, not rules part of the issue, that's where you feel the real weight of your responsibility and how much is riding on you to give the illusion of the game being rules light. 5e, as much as they've tried to say that this is a streamlined version of the game, it may be streamlined compared to 3.5, but this game is in no way, by all consideration compared to other board games out there or just other tabletop games, rules light. There is an expectation of learning at least about a 15 to 30 minute tutorial on how to at least just operate your character in a combat in order to get into 5e. Rather than constantly pushing against this idea that TTRPGs are complex and we can streamline the game. You know what? If you can make the rules concise, people will be willing to spend 30 minutes to an hour learning how to play the game. And then you have guys like, hey, this dude right here that makes guides on YouTube on how to play this game. So the barrier for entry is extremely low. Extremely low. We can explain these rules. We're happy to do it because we love making the content, guys. So if the rules are at least concise to where they are hitting the point, if you can organize rules like, okay, I'm going to harp on it again, crafting, to where this is all present in either your core rulebook, hitting on Pathfinder here, that's the kind of D&D I would love to see. The kind of product that they put out where it's like, the rules are consistent, concise, whatever. This idea that they have designed things to be more streamlined has caused way more clutter in this game than it's actually condensed, than it's dealt with, right? If I seem a little bit frustrated here, it's because on top of having my own personal frustrations about this game and this system right now, and I'm not switching to Pathfinder, so let's get that out of here right now. I'm not switching to Pathfinder because all my players already know how to play 5e. It's what they want to play because as a player, it's fun to play 5e according to them. You're asking me to learn a whole new system. I already know a bit of how to run Pathfinder. I've seen it. I just prefer 5e. So let's get that out of here. Now, my problem isn't with 5e. I like the system. I do not like the core rule books that they have given out to it. If you give me just the 5e system, great. I'm happy with that. However, Wizards of the Coast does not know how to make core rulebooks that are clearly and concisely detailing how to run the game or how to do certain activities that we know players want to do. So from there, the example I always use is economy. There's no support for how to value or judge items outside of basic adventuring gear, transport vehicles, and the odd hard ruling like Wizards learning spells. XGTE has piss poor slapdash rules for magic item economy, and that's it. I agree with that. When I once brought this up in a Reddit discussion, someone suggested you don't need rules because your players can just make up things to spend money on. When I asked for specific examples, they said the following 3 things: paying for airship support, arming the kingdom's military, building an orphanage. So yes, the 3 things they suggested were transport tickets and fucking city and army building rules. This would definitely be fine if this was a rules-like game and you had just hand-waved it narratively that your players are so rich money is no object. But no, this person suggested not only that you make up things to spend money on, but suggested what are usually entire subsystems into or unto themselves. There have been all kinds of third-party products that have come out because they're trying to address this kind of issue right here, right? Now notice I said third-party product. I mean, there's been plenty of us that have made money as homebrewers just straight up making our own rules and putting it out there, right? I don't think that that's right. I actually think that that's extremely lazy for Wizards of the Coast to be putting it on homebrewers and third-party content creators to add in to their game or basically to bug fix for their game, right? This is a critique that we see all kinds of video game developers get, where they're like, okay, we're going to put the game out. It might release in a broken state because we either rush it out the door or what the hell ever, but the modders are going to fix some things, right? There was a mindset where this was just kind of like okay in the video game industry, like back in like 2015 or 16 or something. And we've since learned like, hey, that's not exactly a healthy mindset towards like game releases. However, TTRPGs, at least D&D, has been releasing in this state constantly. And they still, to this day, Wizards of the Coast is putting out products that still come out the door janky, all right? And this is what the ultimate issue is. 5e is a game that pretends to be a narrative-focused, rules-like game, but it isn't. It's still as crunchy as it ever was, and it's just the front end is pretending it isn't, and just putting all the responsibility on the GM to manage it. This in turn brings out the last big line: just homebrew it or use third party. So now, if I want to have any semblance of a mechanical system, it's on me as the GM to make one myself or browse through reams of unofficial content to vet what I want. As somebody that is making a bit of a career off of making homebrew content, I don't think it's right either, okay? I don't think that it's right that Wizards of the Coast for years has done things like over on the DMs Guild said like, well, if we really like what's in your product, we might include it in an official book. We may or may not contact you about that. And we're supposed to just be like, oh, okay, cool. That is at the very least, and I know that Dan Talks is going to get into this, but like that's an example of the exploitation that I know I personally had a problem with, and Dan's going to bring up here in just a second. This isn't me saying homebrew or third party is bad. It's what needs to be compensated for that's the issue. I need to homebrew my own monsters because the guidelines for creating encounters doesn't work. Ignoring they have been revamped twice since the original DMG guidelines. I once saw someone describe 5e as the Bethesda open world of D20 systems, and that's so on point. It's got the bare bones of a decent idea, but for anything with substantial depth, Wizards of the Coast essentially expect you to do it yourself or outsource to third-party content creators. It's lazy and exploitive, especially consider WotC owns many of the channels through which third-party content is distributed. It also expects I have the time to trudge through reams of content to find the diamond in the rough of the many, many subpar third-party publisher supplements, I guess, 3PPS. I'm trying to remember what all that means. This is before getting into a breed of 5e DM I call smug homebrew bros, but that would be another thread unto itself. All I will say is people who excuse 5e's issues with it's good for homebrew are enabling that laziness and exploitiveness on WotC's part to sate their egos. Okay, I 100% agree with you, Dan Talks. And yes, absolutely 100% agree with you. What I really wish Wizards of the Coast would do is if a class clearly comes along that hit the note, right? Where it's like, yeah, we should probably consider this for like official inclusion into the game. Why the hell is it that Pathfinder 2e came out after 5e and they have been constantly adding classes to that system, and Wizards of the Coast has added one that came out and is just preposterous in its design. The Artificer flops on so many of the narrative beats that people are expecting for a magical inventor. In the end, 5e is not a mechanically simple game. It's a game that has all the hallmarks of other overtly crunchier D20 systems, but none of the support for the back end, like a building without supports or a frame. It's a game that offloads the mechanical understanding to the DM. And the thing is, I'd be happy enough to let bygones be bygones and not complain so loudly about it if the general attitude from so much of that dominant zeitgeist wasn't just play 5e and fix it yourself. I like doing the game design side of it, right? I like writing within the 5e system. But mostly what got me into homebrew design was the fact that I was unhappy with what Wizards of the Coast was putting out there. I think that this is also a part of the reason why guys like me are able to get a little bit of success here on YouTube, is because so many people are wondering, how do I run XYZ thing, right? What do I do for this thing in the game? What does this rule even mean? Whatever. So then there's guys like me or like Treant Monk, anybody else here on YouTube that have to sit down and explain this stuff, which like, thank you for the career, I guess, but like, you know, we could make content in other ways that aren't just explaining the confusing fucking rules of this game. People just want GMs to run nothing but 5e because the front end is easy, and have just become so used to DMs compensating for them, wanting to have the illusion of a rules-light game while they carry the load, all while WotC offers no support to DMs. Seriously, DM burnout is a major complaint I see regularly in 5e spaces, but when you look at most official supplements and realize they've become primarily player-focused, with little support for DMs apart from lore and fluff, it becomes clear where WotC's marketing focus is. Yes, Wizards of the Coast, please. In your next book, I swear, in the Spelljammer books, the fact that each of those is like a 64-page book already tells me more than enough that there is most likely not enough content in there to handle the complex systems of like space travel, of potentially time travel. I don't know that that's necessarily going to be a thing, but I cannot imagine one of the most massive campaign settings, which is literally like you're traveling the universe, can be handled in a campaign setting book that is a third of the size of Xanthar's Guide to Everything and Tasha's Cauldron of Everything. That is insane. Well, I'm not okay with that. If you want me to run a game, I'm going to run a game that supports me as a GM, not compensate to have me judge a Calvin Ball match for someone who doesn't understand, if not even respect, the effort I'm putting in. I want the game to function as it should out of the box. If I buy an IKEA flat pack, I don't want to be told, well, it can do whatever you want. You just have to learn DIY and adjust it to do that. It's a chair, Jim. I just want to sit on it. Just dovetailing this with some addendums first, I realized I hashtagged Pathfinder 2e without actually talking much about it, which I guess wasn't the point since this is more of a critique of 5e, and as I went on in the thread, I decided I didn't want to make it a raw system comparison. The reason I brought it up as much as 2e is a much more supported system on the back end for GMs. I will agree with this. Paizo put out a book that is most definitely consumer friendly and very clear for how you're supposed to run the game as a DM/GM. Maths work heaps better. There's rules for most mechanics and support for things that actually work, like, you know, magic item prices. But the takeaway from this shouldn't be just play Pathfinder 2e. The reality is, a big part of 5e's success has been on drawing people who are less inclined towards crunch. So if you want to do that, the solution isn't to play D&D and have your DM arbitrate obtuse crunch. The solution is to consider less crunchy games. There are plenty of games that are easier to pick up and play than 5e while focusing on the things people like about it. And they're much easier on the DM because they don't require essentially brewing their own system to make it work. But my main takeaway is this. If you do like the very popular fantasy D20 fare, and you want those crunchy, gamey systems like grid-based tactical combat, character builds, item economy, etc., then don't force your DM to play a game that's going to burn them out. 5e is a game that attracts many players, but for DMs, the main two kinds who work best with it, in my experience anyway, are those who play fast and loose with the rules and don't care much for nuance and consistency, and those who treat it as a fixer-upper to make their own. That's fine if that works for you and your DM legitimately has fun with it, but realize a lot of people who want to run games are forced into running 5e against their will by tyranny of majority, and all that will do is burn them out. Either watching needs to be more mechanically supportive for DMs instead of making the obvious bulk of their content for player characters and setting fluff only, or the player base needs to expand their taste so that they have more GMs willing to run games for them. And if the monoculture is going to press gang GMs into running a game that burns them out from carrying the game so the players can have fun while putting in minimal effort themselves, then don't act surprised when you struggle to find any willing to run games for you. I stand by basically everything that Dan Talks is putting out in that whole Twitter thread. I have been saying this for years. You can go check out videos, whatever I've had here on the channel. D&D 5e is for players, it's easy to step in and play the game. But for DMs, we have basically no support in terms of codified rules on how to run the game, and Wizards of the Coast has failed to give us a consistent, a set of consistent, clear, and concise rules in any book. What I'm really hoping is that this has been a band-aid that Wizards of the Coast is now trying to rip off for the next edition, and that hopefully we're going to be getting something that is going to include things like random encounter tables that are actually reasonable for play. I mean, throwing up a bunch of first-level characters up against, like, a Manticore is just insane. Like, even in the potential, like, I know that they say, like, well, your players should consider parlaying with them. Well, okay, that's not how players think. Some players do. If they aren't thinking like that and then they get killed, then we get told, like, oh, well, maybe you can do other things, like yada, 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 whatever. Like, let's softball it. I'm like, oh, God. Either you want the game to be deadly or you don't, or you want it to be just T-ball. I don't know. Either way, like, there have been an overwhelming number of design choices that Wizards of the Coast has been making as of late that make me fairly, like, unconfident, I guess we can say, in Wizards of the Coast putting out a new system. Wizards of the Coast, look, we need more consistent stuff going on for DMs. If you eventually put a book out, like you want to do a Mordenkainen's Monsters of the Multiverse, but take all the different stuff that you've had in the DMGs or all the whatever rules, compile it all into one book where it's like, let's look through all the rules that we've given DMs for how to run this stuff in D&D 5e. Let's organize it to where it's all consistent. If there's a rule that something's referencing, that rule that is being referenced should be within like 5 to 10 pages, if not that exact same page of the rule that we're, calling into question. So yeah, that's kind of my take on this one. Let me know what you all think down in the comment sections below. I do a lot of D&D design focused stuff here on YouTube, so if that sounds like something that would interest you, go check out some of my design work here on YouTube and over on the DMs Guild. Anyways, guys, huge shout out to my Patreon sponsors. Thank you all so much for helping me keep the lights on around here and coffee in my blood. Y'all are absolute heroes. And hey, thank you all so much for being here with me today. I hope you all are staying safe, staying healthy, and I will see you all in the next one.